Do you know someone amazing? Someone who has a unique job or hobby? Maybe someone involved with an interesting organization, be it a creative community or a charitable mission. There are people like this hidden in our community, living their daily lives all the while achieving incredible goals, creating works of art, inspiring others to be their best, or just generously donating their time. This show is about putting a spotlight on these members of our community. I'm Ben Harris, a 2017 graduate of Shrewsbury High School and alumnus of the SHS Speech and Debate team, here to introduce a new show that will be hosted by different members of the current team each episode, showcasing their talents as they work to deliver these enriching community stories to you as we celebrate these quiet but undoubtedly impressive individuals. Simply put, we want you to stay with us for a moment, because these are the people you have to meet.
Hello and welcome everyone to episode 8 of You Have to Meet. I'm here today with Dick Miller, Mary Miller, Jim Heald, and Leigh O'Connor, who are all Shrewsbury natives who are involved with marathons. So without further ado, let's get this show running. So first of all, would all of you like to give a brief introduction as well as your marathon history?
Sure.
We'll start with you, Dick, I guess.
Yeah, so I've been volunteering for the marathon for 28 years, started in '92. And throughout those years, some years I run it, some years I volunteer. So I've run it 7 times, and I've been part of the marathon for so long, it feels like part of my life where, you know, we schedule our vacations and a lot of our activities around the marathon. We make sure we don't miss the marathon. So I'm pretty dedicated and love being part of it.
I'm Mary Miller, and I am Dick Miller's daughter. And so when he started volunteering 28 years ago, I had just been born, and so was the victim of those rescheduling of vacations and the workarounds of the marathon. When I turned 18, I started volunteering, and then interned throughout college, and now I manage the volunteers for the Boston Marathon.
My name is Jim Heald, and this was my 13th and last Boston Marathon. And I, over the past couple of years, have transitioned to volunteering and still being a part of it, and that's the way I look at the next leg of marathoning, volunteering.
And I'm Leigh O'Connor, and this was my first marathon and first Boston, so it was quite the experience.
All right, so can you guys give a rundown of like maybe if there were any people who inspired you to get involved with marathons? I know you had your dad, but for all of you other people.
I was in a running club up in New Hampshire at the time. We were living in New Hampshire, and I just got into running at a lower level. And then a couple of people in the club said, you know, we're going to do a marathon. Would you like to get involved? And actually, a woman from the Boston Athletic Association came to our club meeting one night and was looking for volunteers. This is back in the early 90s. And believe it or not, she's still there. She's, how old is Gloria?
She's 85.
Wow. So she came 28 years ago and was looking for volunteers. At that point, it was easy to become a volunteer. It wasn't a waiting list. Now there's a waiting list to get on the volunteer list.
How many people?
So this year we were unable to accept 2,000 applicants that applied during the registration window, and we had 9,700 volunteers throughout race weekend.
Do you want to talk a bit about what the volunteer application process looks like?
Sure. So we open in January on BAA.org. We ask for volunteers' loyalty numbers. If they volunteered in the past, they're able to give us their loyalty number, which is attached to their volunteer history with us. Then we take into account their preferences. If they're part of a returning group, we tend to bring back a lot of our returning clubs, like the one my dad was a part of, and that's how we kind of bring back and keep the same sort of continuity from year to year. So we are very fortunate, and we're always very humbled with the amount of applicants that we get for volunteering.
All right, so Jim and Leigh, anybody who inspired you for marathons?
The motive behind it, I was watching the 100th Boston Marathon on TV at the gym, and it was at that point, that was 12 o'clock start time, and it was 6:37, and people were still crossing, and it was at that point I said, if they can do it, I can do it. So I set my mind to it, and the next year I ran, and then I haven't done 13 consecutive, but I've done 13, so, and also, there's 35,000 people out on that race course that inspire you, and then the thousands of people that line the side And you know, to Mary's volunteering thing, I had always been impressed with the volunteers. And it's such a well-run organization that I said at some point when I'm not running these marathons, I've got to give back. So that's when I started to volunteer, because you can't help but be impressed with the organization and the amount of people that simply volunteer their day.
So I've been a runner my whole life, or from high school on, and when I turned 40, my sister challenged me to run a half marathon. So we started doing those. So a good friend of mine, we were training for a half marathon together. She said, you know, when you turn 50, you should probably do a full. So it's been on the back of my mind to do it. So I did it. And I applied. I'm a charity runner for the Alzheimer's Association. So sent in my application for that. It is an application process just like the volunteers, and you get accepted and you raise money. So it was a great experience.
All right, so I know everybody here has run a marathon sometime in their life. So how would you guys describe training for one?
If I can run a marathon, anyone can run a marathon. All right? I'm president of the Fat But Fit Club. My training is unlike anyone else's. In that, you know, I would do some training runs with Jane and Leigh, and they were always football fields ahead of me, but at least I was on the course with them. But marathon training it's nothing to be taken lightly. You can't, for the most part, just wake up one morning and say I'm going to run the marathon. There's sincere dedication.
Yeah.
Training, learning, starting slow, 3, 5, 7, then you've got 10 miles. Next thing you know, you're doing 17 miles. But the great thing about a lot of the charity runs and the BAA is that they're there to help.
Yes.
They send you emails saying, okay, this is where you should be at. There's a training run on such and such day. So, but if I can run a marathon, anyone can run it.
The Alzheimer's Association was huge. We started training in October. And you start meeting. Every Saturday we would meet in Newton for a long run, or which started off as 8 miles, and then you slowly building up, and then you build down. So every Saturday we would meet as a team, which was huge for me. Just not knowing what I was doing, how to train, what to wear, what to eat, all of those things. They were just a huge support, and every week they sent emails, and without them I don't think I would have been as successful as I was.
I had my dad as my training coach for my first marathon in 2012, and so we trained quite a bit together. We actually ran for the melanoma charity that still is involved with the marathon, and I remember the advice that he gave me, or just kind of the encouragement that he gave me, is don't be surprised by what your body can do, because it is that incremental bit that you really have to commit to. And it's amazing how like Jim said, you start with 10 and then the next week you're able to go to 10 and push a little more and then push a little more. So that was kind of the key motivation that I remember from my dad when training. How much of a time commitment would you say marathon training took out of your lives?
It's a huge commitment. It really is.
Yeah,
it really is.
I mean, you've really, the way I look at it, if you get a schedule, put a schedule together and have different types of runs you want to do every week, and some of the programs will have one's a long run, one's a pace run to get you used to running a certain pace, and then maybe a day you want to do speed work, and then there's other days you want to do easy runs, but then you got to think about nutrition. I think the biggest thing about marathon training is surviving it. If you can get to the end of your last long run, it's like the best day of training, because I've done my last long run. Now I can taper and get ready for the marathon. You've got to take 2 or 3 weeks off just to let your muscles, rebuild, refuel. And if you don't get hurt during training, you're pretty much set. And a lot of people get hurt during training because they don't do it smart. They try to increase too quickly, or buy a new pair of shoes, or wear something new and it messes up something, your stride or something. So it's a challenge and it's a big commitment. I mean, if you're running, marathon training over the years has changed a lot. Some people run 5, 6 days a week. Some people run 3 days a week. I don't know how much you guys were running, but and it also depends on how fast you want to run it. And if you're trying to run a really, really fast time, you may really be pushing yourself to the limit all the time, which is risky.
Everything that you've said is spot on, but as I said to Leigh, there's no day like the marathon day.
Right.
You can either be on, you can be a little bit off, you can be whatever, but when you're running that marathon course, there are definitely moments that the crowds give you the motivation and the pick-me-up that you need. and the water stations and all of these other wonderful things the BAA provide. But Dick's right about it isn't for the faint of heart or weak of leg necessarily to think that you're just going to start running a marathon. You got to train.
And it's a commitment from the family as well. You know, for your spouses, your kids, you know, it affects them as well. They need to be supportive and know that you're going to be gone all day Saturday, or you know, you can't have anybody over Friday nights because mom needs to get her sleep. So things like that. So it is a huge commitment on the family.
Do you guys have any like particular special memories from like marathon days, like Jim mentioned?
Speaking of the crowd carrying you, so we ran Boston in 2012 and it was 90 degrees. And so we had decided, it was my first marathon, just to take it really easy, and my dad was really the coach. He was like, we're gonna take it really easy. And so at the end, he was starting to struggle a little bit. And when we got to Kenmore Square, my family was there. I was at Boston University, so all of my college friends were there. And you would have thought when we got there, I was chopped liver, because he was, he booked it. The crowd, when he saw him, he was way ahead of me. And the entire time leading up to it, I had been pumping him up, and he was like, see ya for the picture. So that always really made me laugh, because we talk about the crowd carrying you. It really carried him right to Kenmore Square, and then he proceeded to
It is amazing because all of a sudden you realize, well, I'm going way too fast right now. I need to slow down. Like, shh, quiet. So,
I had two favorite marathons. One of them was this year because I didn't have an agenda. I didn't have a time that I wanted to compete and or complete with. I just took it in. People laughed about, you know, my run because I enjoyed it. I stopped, I took pictures, I had water, sip of beer here and there. But then the most favorite marathon was 2014.
Yeah.
In light of the 2013 marathon bombing, the energy and everything about that marathon from Hopkinton to the end was just magical. It was just, and it's almost hard to describe, but you get it when you're inside those lanes and you're running. Even as a spectator, you get it.
Oh yeah.
But that by far was the best marathon.
All right, so we've talked a lot about running marathons, and I know a lot of you also volunteer. So Dick, why don't we start with you? I know you've spent a lot of time running and a lot of time volunteering, so how's that dynamic worked out?
I mean, it's a great mix for me because, you know, if I don't run and if I volunteer, then I get motivated to run again. So I get the bug because I can't do it every year. And as I get older, I'm not going to be running as many marathons. But the volunteering part of it is exciting. The job I have now, most recently, is giving out the bib numbers. Runners come in, so you get to meet people from all over the world, and they're so excited to come to Boston because they've now got a bib number to Boston, which is the most prestigious marathon in the world. They've either raised a lot of money, worked hard that way, they trained, they qualified, whatever, but they're so excited. Families are taking pictures. So we're, as volunteers, we get to welcome them and congratulate them. They get these big smiles, and they're so excited. It's so great to see it. So that's infectious for me. And in the past, I've worked at the finish line and I've worked in the expo doing other things, but I kind of like giving out the bib numbers and meeting the runners and able to talk to them and say, where you from? You know, and just hear their story. And some people are in a rush, they don't want to talk, but some people just love to talk. So that dynamic has been good for me, balance between running and volunteering. And I will never say never. I may run another Boston. I don't know.
Dick, do you know anyone that runs the volunteer program at the BAA?
Yes, yeah.
Because when I volunteered to sign up to volunteer, I should say, I was hoping that I would be that bib pass router, you know, at the expo. But I signed up and I was assigned vault loading, which I'm like, what's vault loading, right? So the Saturday before the marathon, but again, I'm not complaining because I met a great group of people, but.
And you got a jacket.
I got a jacket.
That's the best part.
But you don't realize all that goes into it until you're a part of it, like when I learned vault loading. So these cups and these rakes and these Gatorade jugs and all of these things don't just magically appear at every mile. So we meet up in Woburn the Saturday before and we literally load 26 or 27 huge U-Haul things of materials that make it work. And without someone doing that, I don't mind doing it. It's labor intensive, and I appreciate you thinking that I'm young to do it. But one of these days, I want Dick's job here.
Noted.
All right, so Mary, I know you are actually one of the volunteer coordinators, so how has that been?
Yes, I mean this sincerely, it's a privilege because I grew up watching my dad and how much he loved it. And so when I first joined the BAA, I thought that he was this great story, which he is. I'm not taking that away from him. But what I learned when I joined the organization was how many folks are in his company at the organization. We have volunteers that have been with the organization for 20, 25, 30, 40 years. And there's hundreds of them, and I have the privilege of working with them, in addition to all the other thousands of folks as well. And so, Jim, to your point, my dad is at the bib distribution job, and the minimum number of volunteer years that we sort of need to put you in that job is over 15 at the current as it currently stands. And that is simply because of demand, because those folks have not left. We do our best to cycle in, note taken, note received.
That's on camera.
It is on camera. But it's amazing to see the commitment from year to year from the volunteers across the course and across the weekend. And one of my favorite events is our 30-year luncheon, which we bring volunteers who have reached 30 years of service. So 2 more years for you, Dad, and you get to come to lunch. But the coolest part about that is when someone who's been volunteering for 30 years at the start line meets someone who's been volunteering for 30 years at the finish line, and they're meeting for the first time and sharing those memories. It's really cool. And like I said, it's cool to see so many people that share those memories that my dad has that I thought maybe just were exclusive to him, but are certainly not.
All right, so Leigh, I know that you and Jim have both run for charities, and Dick, you mentioned that you also have. So what's it like to do it with a charity?
It's amazing. It makes it so much more worth it. And when you get tired and the training is hard, you think of those people who are sponsoring you and their stories and the money that they've given, and it just really helps you get through those dark days out there on those wintry, cold, snowy days. And you're like, okay, if they're working hard to get well and be strong, then I can do this for them. So it's huge.
And these nonprofits come to, I guess I'll use the word rely, but to really value the monies that are coming in. I ran for Shrewsbury Youth Family Services this year. And I every day, whether it was through CrowdRise or a physical check that was mailed to Shrewsbury Youth Family Services that I was made aware of, you remain really humbled with people's generosity and their willingness just to support you.
Yep.
Mile 19, I was in a little bit of trouble, but I was telling Leigh earlier, I said giving up wasn't an option because there were so many people that supported me that I said I gotta cross that finish line. There's a lot of money at stake. Not that it wasn't going to go through, but it's. Fundraising can be as much work as training. You want to go about it tactful and appreciative of everybody's donation, but you've got to raise some money.
Yep.
So I know both of you have your medals here today with you. So how did it feel crossing the finish line?
It was amazing. It was like, and you all of a sudden get more energy, and I don't know how that's possible. And the volunteers are just the sweetest, nicest people, and they're just so like you're the only person in the world who's just come across, and they just treat you like gold, and they're so proud of you, and it's great. There's a picture of me actually of getting the medal that a friend of mine happened to cross right behind me, and it's just amazing.
And I think anyone can appreciate watching it, spectator, but when you're a runner, when you've crossed that finish line, and Dick alluded to it earlier, obviously we're Massachusetts, we're Boston native, but there's no denying that Boston is, now this sounds self-promotional or snobby or whatever, but it's an elitist marathon. It's very difficult to get a number. You've got to qualify, there are a number of different criteria. The weather in which most people are training to run Boston in April is absurd. So, and it's Patriots Day is one of my most favorite days of the year in Boston. It's just, and then when you finally cross that 26.2 and get your medal.
And it's 0.2, don't forget.
Right.
Okay, so a little bit on a different track. Do you guys have any marathon horror stories? Anything that's gone pretty wrong?
Where do you two begin with the?
Well, the 90-degree one
was
so that one there, they were sending out emails ahead of the marathon, and this was Mary's first marathon, and they were saying, if this is your first marathon, you should consider not running. And my wife, of course, is saying, she shouldn't run. You should, and we had raised, get back to the charity, we had raised a lot of money for the melanoma foundation. So and then our coaches started sending us emails saying, put away the clock, stop at every water stop, drink a lot of water, and just enjoy it. and have fun. And that's what we did, you know. So that could have been a horror story, but what was going on around us was scary because there was ambulances everywhere and people were getting picked up because of the overheating, and it's just that was probably I think it was my worst marathon from a
Time
perspective and conditions, but we didn't look at the watch. We said we're just going to finish. So it's Boston can be snowing in April, right?
That is true.
So you don't know what you're going to get. So
Yeah.
it's just you got to when you pick Boston as a marathon. When I was running more seriously marathons, I would not run a spring marathon. I would pick a fall marathon because usually in October, November, it's going to be cooler.
Yeah.
And if you want to run a fast time, you run in the fall so you can, if you're trying to get a qualifier or trying to do something more of a personal record, you go later, so.
I echo his sentiments. I would say not necessarily from a participating an athlete perspective, but from a volunteering perspective. Last year's marathon was really tough to watch all of the athletes and the volunteers out in those really tough conditions. It was just brutal. It was horrible winds, horrible rain the entire day, and so I was out there with them, and it's this helpless feeling that you wish you could just kind of give everyone a hug and warm them up. And that for me, I remember being the most emotional I've probably been out watching everyone. It is quite an emotional thing to see and to be part of, that sort of intimate exchange of the medal and all that sort of stuff. But that to me, not even from a participant standpoint, but from just a spectator, I guess, or employee standpoint, that was really tough to watch.
No horror stories. I think anyone that runs a marathon knows what it's like to be a bride the night before the wedding. You're wondering what the weather's going to be like because the weather is clutch.
Yeah.
And it's not so much horror stories as there are inspirational stories when you're running that marathon and you see blind runners and amputees and elderly, older people that are running it. Just people that you wouldn't in a million years have imagined that they do it. The wheelchair runners. So it's that's where the motivation is, And when you're dying, whether it's from heat exhaustion or whatever else, you look at them and you say, okay, move on.
So do you guys have any words of advice for people who are looking to run marathons in the future?
I would say, it's tough doing it alone. If you can get with a group, long runs are lonely. If you can get somebody to run with, pick someone you can talk with for a few hours.
Yeah.
But getting with a group, if it's a charity group like they mentioned, or if it's just a running club, starting a beginning marathoning club, get with a team or a running club, and they can help you so much. Or get a coach. I mean, a lot of times there's personal trainers out there if you have the will to do that. Get someone to come in and train you. And I would get. It's tough to do it alone, and can be done. But getting somebody to share the pain would help.
It's a great source of community too. Even, and it's that after the event's over, you still have that community. So I would echo what my dad said and reinforce it with. It's not just for that 3, 4, 5 months of time. It carries on further. So I would definitely encourage a group or a partner or someone to be with. It makes a huge difference.
Yeah, no, exactly. No, I've made friends training with the Alzheimer's Association, and I think moving forward, they'll still be my friends, and we'll keep in touch. And it was just a great, you connected with people that you would have never met before, which was really nice.
I've always been of the mindset, I run, but I'm not so dedicated by the watch to make sure that I've got a certain minute per mile versus rather just take it in, enjoy it, be in it. And there have been some years that I've done great, but there are some real serious marathon trainers, which is great. We all have vices, and someone wants to beat their time from last year or their PR. I'm of the mindset, just enjoy it. I'm not going to win it.
No.
You cross that finish line, you've won, but I'm not going to win it. So.
Right. We were told that we had a banquet the Saturday before, and they're like, just want you all to know, none of you are going to win it, so pressure's off. We're like, all right, good.
But when people ask me how I finished this year, I say I won.
Right.
I crossed the line.
Yep.
Another one I always say is people ask what my time is, and I was like, well, I had a good time. Thank you.
That's pretty good.
I might steal that.
Yeah. So can you guys all give one or two biggest takeaways you've gotten from being involved with the marathon?
I would say good people find good people. I I say that being on both ends of it, and now being in the position that I now have as the manager of the volunteer program, and being now my dad's boss, I don't let him forget that. It's a symbiotic relationship between, I would say, athletes, volunteers, and you can add spectators in too. You know, athletes need volunteers to hand them that cup of water, but volunteers are also out there to support, and they need someone to take that cup of water from them to feel like they have really made a difference and supported them. And I would say the same thing goes for the spectators, that they want someone to cheer for. So I think good people always find good people.
I would just say it's an honor to be a part of it at any level. It's a world-class event, and it's just inspiring to me, to see, like Jim said, all the runners that are out there with a lot of difficulties, from their health or disabilities or whatever they have. But the people out there just inspire me, and it's an honor to be part of it, to either run it or to help.
Ladies first.
Community. It's amazing. The Massachusetts, Boston, from Hopkinton all the way in, the community, the volunteers, the spectators, it was an amazing experience. So that's my takeaway, is just how awesome Massachusetts is.
You reap what you sow. You realize that you're blessed to be able to run. You give back because you're able, and you should. And for those that can, for the 35,000+ that do every year, and for those that want and maybe are younger or inspired now by this little sitcom, it's just an amazing experience. And plus, I'm a funeral director, so I tell anyone I needed something in my obit. So now they'll be able to say that he ran 13 Boston marathons.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
All right, so I think we're going to wrap it up here. Thank you so much for all of you to being here, and thank you to our guests for watching today's episode of You Have to Meet. If you know anybody who you think we really have to meet, be sure to watch out for the contact information that's going to follow. Thank you.